We're live. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for being here. Gerardo Macias with DHR Global Executive Search, and we are so excited for this great conversation that we're going to have. We have a special guest, but before that, just a little bit about DHR. DHR is an executive search firm. We are all over the world offering talent services. And we also have Jobplex, which is an emerging leaders firm also for executive search. And today from Jobplex, we have Linn. She's a partner for the life sciences practice. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you, Gerardo. Thank you. It's good to be here. Looking forward to this presentation. And I think it's a really important topic, and I hope that it'll have a lot of value for the people who've chosen to attend today.
I know it will. And again, welcome everyone, especially to the audience that is connecting right now on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And please feel free to say hi, tell us where are you connecting from. And also, when you have any questions, you may go ahead. And Kara, please, let's continue with the introductions.
Excellent. Thank you again, Gerardo. Gerardo, you're in Mexico and I'm in the United States. And to your point about DHR being a global company and Jobplex being a part of DHR, you and I had the opportunity to meet when we were in Las Vegas a few months ago for
Mm-hmm.
a conference that our company puts on. And it was just such a pleasure to meet you. And so, as a newer member of the organization, I reached back out to you because you've done a lot of podcasting and live streaming. And I asked you if you would do a live stream with me. I'd like to explain maybe to the audience a little bit what this is really all about and what the intention is behind what we're doing today. And we're focusing, as you said, on emerging leader development. So in some fields, the people who are qualified in that field are typically and almost always in greater demand than they are supply. And that's definitely the case in my field of specialty, which is statistics within the drug
Mm-hmm.
development industry. But as I've been doing some research, I realize that we're in the middle of a trend that's been announced by the Department of Labor Statistics that is calling for or predicting a huge increase in the demand in this field. This trend started in 2021, and it's projected to go until 2031. And guess what? The demand for statisticians in research and development is increasing during that time period by 37%. And of course, I'm using math rounding, 36.8%. So, what happens when you already have a field that typically has higher demand than supply, and then you go through a phase where you've got a 37% increase in demand predicted? The supply simply cannot keep up. So I'm asking myself, how are my clients going to handle a 37% increase in the number of statisticians that they need? And it boggles my mind. So that's what I'm really focusing on. And of course, one of the major strategies that people will use in this kind of a climate is to try to poach those professionals from their competitors. So how are you going to keep your competitors from taking your talent from you in this kind of a increase for demand? A huge successful strategy for that is going to be developing your emerging leaders so that your competitors don't take your talent away from you. And that's the primary focus of our discussion today.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you, Kara. And let's please introduce our partner, Maryanne, and then she'll make an introduction of our special guest today.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. Gerardo and I have done a previous webinar or podcast, and so he and I have some experience working together. I work for DHR. I'm part of the Leadership Consulting Group, I'm an OD consultant. I have about 25 years of experience and about 6.5 years at DHR. My background is really academic and professional. So, unlike Gary, who we'll be introducing in a moment, I'm going to really give you a high level kind of presentation about career development, about emerging leaders, and retaining top talent. So I hope you will you'll work with me on that. My audience primarily in the past, before I started doing more work with Jobplex, has been the executive suite and then down VPs, directors, and probably not much further. So Gary really brings a special piece of information to this presentation by talking about what he does. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce Gary, unless Kara would like to say something. Gary, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Maryanne. It's great to be here. Gary Sullivan. I'm a statistician by training. I worked 28 years in the pharmaceutical industry at Eli Lilly and Company. Half that time as a statistician, the other half managing statisticians. And late in my career, I was asked to develop a leadership program for the statisticians in our group. And from that point on, I just became very passionate about leadership. And when I retired from Eli Lilly, it's what I wanted to do, was to basically train and counsel and advise emerging leaders. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. I have my own company, Espirer Consulting. And I also work with a business partner, Alexander Schott, in Europe. And he and I have developed, I think, a very special and unique leadership training course for statisticians. And we've been administering that and training statisticians for about the last 3 years. We've trained over 300 statisticians during that time and working with many companies. And as Kara said, statistics is in huge demand: statisticians, data scientists, quantitative experts. And the way that statisticians, again, can be more impactful is by developing leadership skills. And these aren't just skills where you can lead organizations, but we define leadership as being able to convince others to act on your ideas. And that's what statisticians spend a lot of their time doing: data scientists, quantitative scientists. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but happy to be on the panel today and look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
I'm going to jump back in here for a minute. So we're really excited to have you, Gary, and thank you for agreeing to be a part of this discussion with us. You know, I've been working with statisticians for about 20 years in the drug development industry. And you come from a part of that field that really requires exceptional communication and leadership skills. You were on the non-clinical side, and obviously there's a clinical side as well, and they're both really important, from research all the way through the development phases of what we call drug development. And when I thought about asking you to join us on this discussion, your tenure of experience and then the work you've done in leadership development was really at the forefront of what I thought you could bring to the discussion. And by the way, there are so many elements and principles behind the development of emerging leaders that go across industries. So although we're talking about this in the context of my specialty area, which is statistics and biostatistics, these principles will cross many industries. So as we go forward in the presentation, we're going to have Maryanne, who's our resident expert on our leadership consulting team, talk about the general knowledge about emerging leaders across industries. And then Gary is going to interject information and his insights about the pharma industry and statistics specifically. So I want to ask just a couple of questions to Gary, and then we're going to transition to Maryanne's more formal presentation, but we'll all be kind of discussing it with her. And as we go along, please feel free to give any questions or comments that you have in the chat so that we can interact with you in the audience as well. So Gary, as you started your career many years ago, I'm curious, At what point did you realize how important leadership skills were to your development in your career, and what did you do about it?
Yeah, I don't know that there was a singular moment, but it just kind of came gradually. I started, I think, recognizing the importance of leadership in general, maybe about 7 or 8 years into my career. And then as years went by, I had figured more and more out some of the skills and some of the important things that we needed to do as statisticians. And I think it really came to a front when I was asked to develop the leadership training. And then I really had to think deeply about all of those skills. So it was very gradual. I always tell people that I wish I knew then what I know now. And that's part of why we put this training together, was to hopefully give people a jump start and they don't have to go through the growing pains and such. But to answer your question, like I said, it was a gradual thing. And I gradually figured out the importance of, like you said, communication and networking and building trust and understanding the business and the science. So it was just gradual, I think, over the first 15 to 20 years of my career.
Okay, thank you. So, one thing I've noticed in my career is that sometimes statisticians get to a point, sort of an inflection point in their careers, and they want to take the next step. That next step being a position with formal responsibilities for leadership and managing people. And when I call them as a recruiter and I say, oh, I'm Kara with such and such company, and I'm calling to tell you about an opportunity, and I realize they haven't had leadership experience, but that's the next logical step in their career, and they're interested. And then I say, but what do you think it is that makes you qualified for this position? And I'm not kidding you. Many times these candidates have not said one word about the leadership responsibilities of the new position, managing other people, how important it is to manage people, and what they think they could do to manage people. All they say is, well, I've put in my time, I've developed myself, I'm a really good statistician, and it's my turn to be promoted. So I think that a lot of candidates lack the perspective about what leadership is really all about. I'd like you to respond to that, and then also tell me, what are the biggest mistakes you've seen managers make in terms of developing their emerging talent, in the context of sometimes the emerging talent doesn't realize that what they don't know. They don't know what they don't know.
Yeah. So I'll take the first question. The first thing I would say is that, and what I tell people is that you need to start working on I'll call them leadership skills. People refer to them as soft skills or people skills. I think as soon as you get into the profession, as soon as you have your first job, and we really focus in our training on starting with communication, and I think that's the best place to start. I think communication and the ability to build trust, those we would call sort of the foundational building blocks of leadership. So I think people need to be starting right away and developing those skills and honing those skills, and then adding skills as you get along. So in some ways, to answer that question, when you ask someone what makes you ready for this role, they should be ready to respond to, well, I'm an excellent communicator. I've got great experience in terms of building trust. I've got a great passion for wanting to learn the business or the science that I support. I've got experience around working in a diverse set of projects. I've had experiences maybe leading projects or leading small initiatives. Those are the types of things, at least when I was a statistician or a managing statistician, I would look for those skills in people. That's what I want to see, and that's what I see as the keys to leadership. So that's I guess the answer to the first question. Second question, in terms of mistakes, I don't know that I remember making any. I mean, I made mistakes other people did in terms of maybe mismanaging a relationship or not communicating effectively. But when I look back and sort of think about what were those mistakes, and it was just a mistake from the standpoint of I should have been working on these skills much earlier in my career, and I should have first and foremost recognized the importance of these types of skills, recognized the skills that are required to be a leader. And again, I'll go back to this definition of leadership that I gave, that the ability to convince others to buy into your ideas. It's a very simple definition, and I think statisticians can relate to that, but I think other people can too. So I think it is a very broad definition. So the answer to the second question, I think, is just not understanding enough about these skills and the importance of these skills, and making an effort to actually proactively develop these skills and to continue to develop these skills. I know we've talked about mistakes that leaders make, and if that's something we want to discuss too, we can talk about that. Just the emerging leaders, that is.
Great. Thank you. I think we have a question from the audience.
Yes. And this is, I mean, in this conversation, this is what is exciting, because this question relates to leadership in general. What's your opinion about leadership styles, especially servant leadership, from Alberto in Mexico City?
I can take that, and then others
Sure.
can. I think everyone should have their own, in a sense, leadership style. I tell people that I think it's okay to look for certain characteristics from leaders that you like, but never try to copy a leader per se. I think there are certain qualities around leadership in terms of things like authenticity. I mean, you need to be yourself as a leader. People can tell real quick if you're faking it. I probably tend to be more along the lines of a servant leadership style, in terms of especially leading people, that I'm one more that I want to know what I can do to help my people do their jobs more effectively. I would say that I'm in terms, I won't comment on lots of different leadership styles, but I'm not a big fan of the command and control style, where people don't feel like they have a say, or that their leader wants to hear their input. I really feel like a leader is serving his organization, her organization best when they're leveraging the skills, the knowledge, the experiences of everyone around them. And that's kind of the style of leadership I had.
And then I would just like to add to that a lot of leadership style depends on the culture of the organization and what the organization values. That idea of servant leadership, certainly if the organization tends to be more collaborative, you probably will see more elements of that. But in general, I'd just like to say that, you probably will see all kinds of different styles in an organization. It's just that some work better than others.
Great answer. Thank you, Maryanne and Gary. And just another question before we continue with Maryanne, actually, from Melissa. She's in Grand Rapids, Michigan, talking about emerging leaders, first-time leaders. How critical and how can we develop the building relationships, networking, connecting, and collaborate with others? Is this part of succeed criteria while transitioning?
Absolutely. It's part of the success criteria for, being an emerging leader, moving on along the career transition or the career path. So I think that really part of that is development, the development that you have for scheduled for individuals. How do you want to develop them? And obviously, Gary talked a little bit about communication. So I would see that really focusing in on building relationships, networking, connecting, and learning to collaborate. Just being part of, whether you're part of a formal team, whether you're overseeing a team formally or informally, those are certainly things that one can develop.
Yeah, I would echo the communication part. And again, this is why I think the starting point for leadership development is communication, because when you learn how to communicate, everything else becomes much easier. So a lot of people maybe struggle with networking and connecting with others because they haven't had experiences in communicating in diverse sort of settings. So communication is not just about speaking and planned presentations, but also interacting with others. And so focusing on communication skills as a start, then allows you to just be more comfortable in terms of when you're working with people, when you're around people, the ability to build those relationships, or the ability to do that formal networking, to go and meet with people and be able to have a conversation with them. So again, communication, I think the foundation for that makes everything a whole lot easier.
So those are really great answers to some really good questions. And I think we should get into the content that Maryanne has prepared. We do have a question, some more of the questions that are coming in, but let's hold them off for just a little bit and address them as they apply to the context that we're providing here. So,
of course.
Thank you, Gerardo.
Yeah, just give me 1 second and we'll show our presentation. And in the meantime, thanks again, everyone, for being here. There we go.
One more. Two more slides. There we go. One more.
There we go. Thank you. So 50 years of research really talks about what a career line looks like. And so for most of you in HR, you're probably very well aware of developing talent and identifying talent, first of all. So I wanted just to provide you with kind of an overview of a graphic. And again, it may not apply to everyone equally in the same way, but succession planning and development are based on, verifying who has potential across the career line. So typically when we start with individual contributors, and that also includes the category of emerging leaders, because individual contributors, even if they do not have, any kind of formal experience leading groups, this is a time when typically they would be developing those kinds of skills, and we might refer to them as emerging leaders. The next area typically is supervisors, team leaders, and managers. And that's kind of the next step that an individual would take. And again, more formalized kind of management, collaboration, teamwork, etc. And then finally, I don't want that word leaders to be distracting, because we talk about leaders, and Gary in particular is talking about focusing on leaders. Everybody can be a leader at every stage. But in this case, when we look at leaders, we're really talking about top executives and the C-suite. The idea is that we are assuming that they are leaders. They have developed those skills that we've talked about. So Gary, any comments that you want to make before we move on?
Not really. Like I said, I agree. And I especially agree with your part about anyone can be leaders, at least in the sense of defining them in terms of getting people to being able to influence others. And I agree that, like I said, the scale is kind of generally, I would agree with that. I think in some areas, like in statistics, I think we're looking for those types of supervisor type team leaders earlier and earlier, because as Kara said, just the shortage of talent. So if you can demonstrate leadership early in your career, there's a lot of managers that are willing to accelerate your path. So
next slide, please. So we wanted to talk a little bit about, as you are an emerging leader, an individual contributor and an emerging leader, what kinds of competencies are going to contribute to that? So what are the kinds of things that you have to develop? What are the steps? So if we look at it and we start with an individual contributor, we look at people who are managing themselves for the most part, at least in a more formal way. Informally, they may be overseeing other people, but they tend to be the people who are doing the work. But as Gary said, they also have to be able to relate to others. So communication skills are certainly important. Collaborating, managing conflict, all of those kinds of things. Even if you're not managing formally a group of people. And then that idea of building a career, really looking at where I want to go with things. What are the kinds of of skill sets I'm going to need to move on to the next level if I decide to do that. And again, there's nothing wrong with staying as a real technical expert, but even technical experts have to have some of these other kinds of competencies and skills. So when we move on to the next category, which is manager, and Gerardo, you can just put all of those up if you'd like. We are really talking about an individual beginning to manage themselves. You'll see a little more competition, a little more focus on winning, perhaps. There has to be a little more bit of resilience and resourcefulness because you then tend to become responsible for the resources of the group. And relating and managing up, that might be the most important thing. You're not only relating to your group, but you're also then, you tend to be managing up on a more frequent basis to the executive level. The next area is setting the direction. You know, again, we're really looking at the idea of focusing on establishing the purpose of the group. You're facilitating and executing on plans. You're really setting the expectations for people moving forward. And then you're acquiring and leveraging skills for the group that are important. The managing the work, which is the next category, really focuses on more formal influence. You're really looking at acquisition of employees. You may be involved in, you know, development. You're evaluating people for the most part, and you're really executing and responsible for the work, which then leads to that managing work, where you're overseeing a group, really trying to focus on the team. You're making decisions for the group. You're creating structures and processes that usually have to go into place when you've got more than one individual working on things. And then finally, developing teams and culture. So again, that last about being customer-centric, really focusing on communicating and respect, developing trust, and really moving towards that more collaborative effort. Developing emerging. So one of the first things we need to know is the characteristics of emerging leaders, which we'll talk about in a moment. The second step is really about having a good sense of developing a successful profile.
Excuse me, Maryanne, you're kind of cutting in and out a little bit. I don't know if other people are having difficulty, but I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Yeah, I think there's an echo. Maybe just let's all mute our microphones.
Yeah, try muting your microphone to see if that helps.
And if it doesn't, Maryanne, you could go out and then come back in if you need to.
Okay, all right. So that first area of developing emerging leaders is really knowing the characteristics of the emerging leader. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The next step is to develop a success profile. So what are the roles and the competencies that are necessary for an individual to be successful, you know, as an emerging leader, as a manager, as a supervisor, or as an executive? This is not a job description. It really goes into more specifics than just laying out responsibilities. And then finally, that third step is creating a development plan. So how are you going to develop your high performers, those people who really want to move along that career line? I'll stop there and ask if there are any comments or questions from the, you know, our speakers here or from the audience. Okay, let me move on then. We'll go back to that characteristics of emerging leaders. So next slide, please. So some of the things that we think are really important for emerging leaders are growth mindset. That's that whole idea of being optimistic, really being curious, really wanting to move forward. So having some thought, some self-awareness of who they are and where they want to go with their careers. The next is being a team player. And obviously that involves collaboration. Again, as Gary's mentioned, great communication skills, and you're going to be part of a team. I mean, that's just generally the way it works. I don't care what kind of industry you're in, it kind of moves across industries. The next area is that idea of latent influence. So as you start to become more of a leader with your team, how are you going to influence them? I mean, I suppose, like Gary mentioned, you can use command control and tell them what to do. But typically speaking, influencing or persuading people is much more motivating than, simply telling them what to do. And the expectation will also be that you have, as an individual, have to really focus on what that means. How do I become more influential? And then that last area is high potential. So you may be identified as a high potential, or it may just be that you're performing at a very high level. So, and again, you would want to define what those mean specifically for your group. Next slide.
Maryanne,
Yes.
I have a comment real quick.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that we normally talk about looking for these qualifications or these characteristics so that we know who to put our energies into to develop as emerging leaders. And when we're thinking in the context of the supply-demand criteria that we talked about earlier, it also occurs to me that companies are in some fields are just going to have to not only look for which people have good potential to develop into emerging leaders, but they're also going to need to look into how they can be more proactive about helping maybe the ones that don't look like the high performers, how they can be proactive in helping them to develop the leadership skills that are going to be necessary to keep moving the organization in that department forward, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that kind of answers the question that Kara just talked about was that idea of a success profile. So as you're bringing people into the organization, you want to have a good idea of what a profile will look like at various stages. So the idea of a success profile is to really engage stakeholders. So that means other managers, other people that perhaps work in tandem with the role, and really find out what they see are important roles and responsibilities. And I think the thing that you want to also think about is the fact that this may be a little bit different. It's unique to your organization and the context of your company. So for statisticians, it might be very different, a different looking kind of profile in terms of what you want to focus on for development, or what you want to focus on when you're hiring or bringing someone new into the organization.
Maryanne, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I'd like to just give an example of that.
Sure.
One of the clients that I've worked with in the past, that's a leading company in drug development, shared with me as I've been working with them in the past that one of their company values is outspokenness. They want to hire people who not only are technically qualified, but who are also willing to speak up and not hold back when they've got an important piece of information to share or a point to advocate for. So that would be an example in my mind of unique organizational context to add to your success profile.
Next point, please. So a success profile also allows you to identify the priorities. What are the key performance indicators? What is someone in this role going to have to accomplish over time? Setting a success profile really targets in or focuses in on that kind of information. And then I believe there's one other: develop a common language across the entire talent management system so that everybody knows how to talk about, what is required of an individual to move into a role, to perform well in the role that they're currently in, et cetera. And it also gives you a clear measure of potential and capabilities so that you're able to build that into feedback, into development opportunities, and to even performance evaluation. And then development plans. So what do we want to do? What do we really want to focus on? We want to make career paths and talent development a priority in the organization. So obviously, the way that both Kara and Gary have talked about it, there's going to be a real need for statisticians moving forward. So just as an example, you have to make talent development a priority. It's not so much about just hiring new people. It's also about looking at the individuals you have in the organization and how you can develop them. There's also that idea of training managers to spot emerging leader talent. And part of the way that they can do that is if they have a success profile that they can use as a guide. So again, it's not just the job description. It's about then evaluating those emerging, spotting those emerging leaders so that they can be developed. You want to create mentoring opportunities. And again, this is part of that development plan, maybe mentoring, maybe coaching for emerging leader talent, because, you know, they are going to really benefit from understanding how people have done things well in the past. And then finally, part of that development for emerging leaders is to create stretch opportunities, stretch assignments for them to practice the leadership skills, the communication, not only their technical skills, but the communication skills, their ability to really focus on leading a group. And then finally, there's some important key issues for us to remember in talent development. And Gerardo, if you could just put all three of those up. This emerging leader development really provides emerging leaders with a defined career path. So people aren't in the dark about what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And Gary, I think, probably gives some very good direction on how that can happen. But also it's about the success profile, and it's about communicating. What are the next steps? What have I done well? What do I need to do better? Also, developing that internal talent protects organizations from disruption, especially in the kind of hiring market that, you know, may lead to unexpected attrition. And an example of that is the tech industry. There have been a lot of layoffs. There have been people that have left. So if we know, you know, what we've got in terms of the talent that we're retaining, we can move forward a lot more comfortably, knowing that we can move people into different positions if we need to, and also develop them accordingly. This also includes a development system. So for the HR people, we want to make sure that they're hiring and identifying potential early, and that they're intentionally developing their individuals, their hires in the organization. And in this case, we're talking about emerging leaders. That being said, I will turn it back over to Kara and Gary and Gerardo.
Thank you so much, Maryanne. And I really love the last point in regards to intentional development and training. I love that. And by the way, we have a quick question from Francisco. He's in McAllen, Texas. He says, in a globalized world, cultural, indeed plays a major role in leadership. What can you tell us about how to lead without clashing with local cultures? That's interesting. Gary, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, sure. I would say be careful. But I think this is actually broader, because when we talk about, because we get this question a lot in terms of just cultural differences, and you can practice this even really at a local level, because even within a large company, different functions and different parts of the organization sometimes have unique cultures, even within a profession. Kara talked about, I'm non-clinical by training and clinical. There's a difference between those two cultures of statisticians. So anytime you're working with someone else, whether it's just someone across the company or someone across the world, it's to take the time to learn what you can about that culture, about the people in that culture, how they like to work. And this may seem like, okay, this may take time, it may slow things down, but at the end of the day, it's really more effective. So taking the time and doing that, and again, this is where the networking comes in, connecting with people that have worked with that different culture, and having them help you understand some of the pitfalls, some of the things to avoid, and what they'll respond to most positively.
Yeah, Maryanne? Oh, you're
I'm sorry about that. I didn't really have anything to add to that, other than you really have to focus on communicating and understanding the culture. Culture seems to be playing a much more significant role these days, or maybe it's just that people are more aware because we've become a global society, that culture, what groups value, is really an important consideration. And you not only have to understand, but then you also have to be able to do that. Kara, could you please go on mute for a minute? That's all I really wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you, Maryanne. Yeah, I think that's a great topic, and definitely we can go on and on, in regards to culture, especially, I mean, from my experience here in Mexico, and our team recruits executives in the US, in Canada. So it's a big topic for us. But at the end, within every company, there are different cultures, from different teams. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Let's move on and take advantage of Gary, of course. Now, I believe we don't have any more questions right now from the audience, but please feel free to, again, write your comments. Kara, I know that you have some comments.
You can tell by my body language because you're tuned in, aren't you? So I was thinking this is a little bit of tongue in cheek, but it's not. Something about the culture of statistics and statisticians. There, as Gary mentioned, there are individual cultures, even different classes of statisticians, and then different cultures in different companies, etc. But statisticians, a lot of times they tend to be kind of quiet people, more quiet, very introspective, very analytical, always thinking. And we have a joke in the industry. Some of us have heard it, some of us haven't, but it's how do you tell the difference between a statistician who's an introvert and one who's an extrovert? Well, the introvert will, when he's talking to you, he or she will be looking at his own shoes. And so, that person's very introverted. The extrovert, not that much different. They'll be looking at your shoes while they're talking to you. So they're looking at their own shoes, or they're looking at your shoes. So you do have to understand different cultural tendencies in different groups. And Gary's smiling, he gets it.
I also think that the success profile can really be helpful there in identifying culture, because success profiles are very unique to organizations. So it's at that point that's a consideration.
Right. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the success profile piece of your presentation, Maryanne, and I'd like to get Gary's input on this. I think it's really important for a company to take seriously this concept of both the success profile and the development plan. Oftentimes we operate simply from the viewpoint of job descriptions. But once you've got a team of people in place, they need to know what kinds of skills are going to be necessary for them to qualify to get to the next level in their career with that company. If you don't do a good job of communicating that to them and being honest about it and not just blowing them off when they ask you, well, how do I get promoted? What do I need to do? They're going to leave. So this idea of having a success profile that you can share within your organization is really important. And I'd like to hear Gary talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and I sort of think of it as like the expectations that you put on the employees within your organization. I know that's what we used to talk about a lot when people would come in, that they would ask, what are your expectations? Or again, what do I need to do to be successful? And whether that's through promotion guidelines or just different types of guidance in terms of being successful. So the one thing I would say, and it kind of goes back to your joke about communication, that most statisticians do tend to be introverts. I'm an introvert by nature. I learned that I need to be an extrovert sometimes. I need to be able to speak out. I need to be able to get comfortable pushing back, to be able to network and connect and build relationships with people. So that part of communication, and that's why, at least in the statistics profession, that's very important from a standpoint of developing those communication skills. So being comfortable, being able to speak around people, being comfortable interacting in meetings, knowing when to jump in, knowing when to listen, not being afraid to speak your mind, as you talked about before. So I think that is very important in terms of when I work with people, I try to help them understand these are some of the things that I know will help you be successful as a statistician. And I'll go back to some of the comments that in some of the slide content Maryanne was showing before, that in a sense, it's not waiting. Some of it is taking the initiative to invest in those skills very early and immediately and continue to build those skills. And I like the slide with the individual contributor and the manager. And one of the things we always wanted to tell people is that in order to become, in a sense, a manager, and I'll use that term kind of loosely, and whether that's some sort of an assigned type of leadership role, whether it's people responsibilities or just leading a project, in order to become a manager, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can function as a manager. So in a sense, we're saying, show the initiative, show your ability to think outside the box, show your ability to try to set direction, to try to influence the organization before you're given the responsibility to do that, and the firm expectations. So we look for people that have some of those skills and can demonstrate those skills. So like I said, when you start seeing people demonstrating the ability to do that, that's in a sense when you tag them and say, okay, this person's got potential because they're doing this even without the authority of an organization or the assigned role or the title. That they can do it already, so they'll be very successful if we elevate them to that point.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Gary. And well, it seems that our time is almost up. So to the audience, if you have any other comments or questions, please go ahead. Kara and Maryanne, please.
But Gerardo, I did notice that there was another question that came in, and I don't think we've addressed it. It was from Sylvie Faria. She said she agrees that with the organization context or culture is a difficult concept to grasp with objectivity. And she says values can't only be words on a wall. So how does it tie in with leadership behaviors? And I was kind of noodling that around in my mind as, we've been discussing these other things, and love to hear what you guys have to say. But I did have one comment about it. And that is that I think that there's often a lack of a feedback loop when it comes to leaders. No matter how much we talk about servant leadership and other kinds of leadership, in practice, leadership tends to be pretty top down in most organizations. And I think that even in organizations where, maybe the leadership is more servant style, or where there's an awareness, I think that maybe we could do better if we had put a priority on listening to those who are being led and listening to the feedback that they have, soliciting their feedback about what do they think of their leaders. I mean, if you have people who are who are demoralized because they think that their leaders are hypocritical or their leaders don't fulfill their promises, etc. That's just disastrous for an organization. And I mean, that's just what I'm sitting with here as I look at that question.
And I also think, just to add to that, that typically speaking, we've got to have managers, we've got to have executives, we've got to have people at the top who model the behaviors that they want, for their organization. And that's really where culture begins. Now, that's not to say that we don't have some impact, at lower levels in terms of defining what the norms of behavior would be. But, if an organization values honesty, for example, you would expect that key executives would model that kind of behavior, and that their expectation would be that, the people under them do the same.
I'll make one quick comment, and I'll say, if you want to start to build yourself a really strong brand as an emerging leader, demonstrate that you can be a good listener. I've worked with a number of exceptional leaders, and that's one of the qualities that they all have in common, is that they're great listeners. They want to hear from the people within their organization or their leadership team because they know they're smart people and they've got good ideas. And once you demonstrate to people that you're willing to listen and put their ideas into practice, you'll get more of that. It just creates this virtuous cycle of productivity and innovation and growth.
Totally. Just like Douglas is mentioning, listening, reflecting, and sharing. Thank you, Douglas. And we have a question from Chen King. It says, for these emerging leaders, how to tell whether they are ready for becoming a people manager?
That's the $64,000 question.
Maryanne, would you like to comment first?
Well, I'd just like to say that I think emerging leaders are already demonstrating, or they should be demonstrating, some of those characteristics that we would see in people managers, whether it's managing conflict, whether it's collaborating, again, that communication that Gary keeps stressing. I think that, you need to be on the lookout for those kinds of things, being self-aware, being a great listener, etc. So those are all things that you would look at in order to really kind of gauge what's the next step for this individual.
And I would agree exactly with what Maryanne said in terms of what to recognize from them, but I would even have a conversation with them to help them understand what they're signing up for. Because I think a lot of times there are certain people that want to be people leaders because they tie it to becoming a higher level leader. But what I tell people is if you want to be a supervisor, you need to be ready to put the people in your group ahead of you sometimes. And I think that's the thing they don't understand, that if for those of you that have children, it's like being a parent, that your needs don't come first anymore. And that's the way I used to view my leadership roles, is that I want to put my people first. If they are successful, then I will be successful. So if I focus on their needs and I'm willing to put their needs ahead of mine, then in a sense, that's, I think, an indicator as to being a good supervisor of people.
And then in addition to that, do not penalize those people who are just really great at being individual contributors, who are great at managing themselves, who maybe informally can work and collaborate with others, but just may not be ready, ever ready, or may not want to move up into that kind of position. And I know there are a lot of companies these days that look at having kind of a career path, a two-pronged career path for those individuals who want to stay individual contributors, and for those who really want to move forward and take on more management/leadership responsibility.
There's another thing that
yes,
occurred
go ahead,
to me.
Karen. Go ahead, Karen.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to ask Gary about this. I think sometimes with regard to the statistics field in drug development, because of the lack of qualified, candidate pools, we sometimes have to promote people who really maybe are not necessarily ready yet. Maybe they don't have the people skills yet. And I mean, I've seen this happen. It's probably not ideal, but sometimes I think that just has to be done. But there should be things that can be done from a management standpoint to help those people learn and grow into those positions. So would you address that, Gary?
Yeah, I'll address it generally. I think we talked about this before, that when people become leaders in general, whether they're positioned as leading a team or leading a group of people with supervisory responsibilities, I think a lot of times people make the mistake that once they've been promoted or elevated, that they're validated as a leader and that they don't have to work at becoming a better leader. And I would say specifically for your supervisor question, yeah, you could put someone in a supervisory position, even though they may not be totally ready, but help them understand that they're going to need to continue to improve as a supervisor leader. Find them a good mentor, and make sure that they're still getting coaching. I know my first people manager role, I had a great mentor, and I would make mistakes. I would go to them and talk about certain situations, and they would tell me, like, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. You need to do it this way, or in the future, use this type of approach. So you're constantly still developing, making mistakes, but you always have to be what we would call a student of leadership. You always have to be looking at getting better. There's never a point where you're going to have it all figured out.
That's why curiosity, I think, and self-awareness are so critical in that idea of self-reflection. Because unless you're able to do that, it really doesn't matter how many mentors, how many coaches you have. It's really all on you. You do have to be given opportunities. But again, to really reflect on what this means to me moving forward. Is this helping me? Is this a practical kind of a focus for me? And what are my managers doing to really support me to move forward?
Great way to end this conversation. And yes, Monica, we'll have more events like this. Thank you so much for connecting. And thank you, really, Gary, for your time. I mean, for your expertise. And definitely we'll be organizing more live events with Kara and Maryanne. On behalf of DHR Global and Jobplex, DHR Company, thank you so much. Kara, Maryanne, Gary.
Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. If you're on LinkedIn, you can find one of us and we would be more than happy to follow up with you. Or Monica, even if you have any ideas for topics moving forward, that would be great. We're always looking for things of interest for our audience.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks
Gary.
for the opportunity.
Maryanne. Gerardo.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everyone. Thank
Take
you,
care.
audience.
Bye, everybody.